Okay, time for a new series on my channel because I'm teaching introductory psychology for the first time in a good while. And I always like teaching that class, so I'm hoping this will be fun. So when teaching psychology to students who probably haven't had psychology before, maybe they had a high school psychology class, maybe they're retaking the class because they had a bad experience the first time. One of the first things I like to do is just explain what is psychology. A lot of students come into class with possible misconceptions about what the field includes. A lot of people expect a lot of coverage of things like therapy, or sometimes they even think that they're going to learn how to do things along the lines of like reading people's minds. That's not what psychology is, and we're going to have a whole class where you kind of get a feeling for what it actually is. But I mean, there are a lot of reasons that these misconceptions persist. One of the things is, like in movies, if someone says they are a psychologist or have a psychology degree, they often have them doing things like therapy, or there was a movie that was very popular when I was in college called Basic Instinct. Not famous for the psychology, famous for the sex scenes mostly. But one of the main characters, Sharon Stone's character, she had this skill, like she could manipulate people and read their minds. It's because she had a degree in psychology. Also on TV shows, when you have a psychologist, even when you have a psychologist who's not hired as a therapist, they do things that look like therapy, like on the TV show Bones. If you've ever watched that show, Dr. Sweets, the FBI psychologist, instead of doing forensic stuff that usually would be carried out by an FBI psychologist, he does therapy with his coworkers and quotes Freud and stuff like that. That's not very representative of what psychology is. And if I ask people to name a famous psychologist, they often name Dr. Phil. And Dr. Phil's not the best example of a psychologist. He does have a degree in psychology. In fact, he has an advanced degree, a PhD in psychology. I also have a PhD in psychology in a different field. Mine is in developmental psychology. His is in clinical psychology, and that does include the therapy type of stuff. But also what he does, the activities that he engages in are really, his TV show. If you haven't seen Dr. Phil, if you don't know what Dr. Phil does, he has guests come on his show and they very briefly explain their situation, their problem, and he gives his take on what they're going through. And on his show, he is freely allowed to insult people or insinuate insulting ideas and things like that. He often gives sort of his take on things, which is opinion. And we, in psychology, we're actually trained to rely on evidence and science. And I'm going to talk in a lot more detail about that. And then also, even in terms of like therapeutic sorts of activities of psychologists, he does a lot of referrals, referring people out to other people. Like he sends them to someone else sometimes when the show is over. So, I mean, his show is entertainment. Dr. Phil is an entertainer now. He no longer has a license to practice. And I'm sure there's a lot of complicated reasons for that. But he no longer has a license to practice. He did earn a PhD in psychology. Now, so a lot of people, they come in and they expect the content of Dr. Phil's show to somehow be predictive of what they're going to learn in a psychology class. And if you're coming in with that misperception, I just want to make it clear, no, it's not going to be that. You need to think of this as a science class. And many people, when they hear that, they think, well, that's kind of ridiculous. No, biology is a science. Physics, chemistry, those are sciences. Psychology is not a science. All right, well, the thing is, the actual field of psychology, not just all the things that might get affiliated or associated with psychology. You know, to get a degree in psychology, to call yourself a psychologist, you have to learn a lot of research. You have to learn a lot about using the scientific method, and your activities, if you go and become one of the applied type of psychologists, your activities are supposed to be based on evidence gathered from the scientific method. And I will say more about that in the future. So you do need to think of this as a science class where you're going to be learning terms, definitions. There's a lot of terms to learn for this class, and I'm not going to be teaching you how to do therapy. Even in upper level classes that are about psychotherapy, they don't teach you how to do them. That's graduate level work. That's advanced work, advanced training, and this sort of thing you do with supervision. So what type of science is psychology? What is it the science of? Psychology is the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. For many years, we used to just put behavior, but we have recently updated it to say no, mental processes too. And I'll even say more in the future about why we only focused on behavior for a while. And so scientific study, that means that you can't just make stuff up. All right, you can't just talk about whatever you think is interesting or whatever you think could be happening with people. You can't just say why you think people are behaving. You have to gather evidence. You have to conduct studies. If you go to a bookstore like Barnes & Noble or Books A Million, those are chain bookstores that are in my area. If you go to the psychology section, the vast majority of those books there are like self-help or maybe history of psychology, and they often include people who weren't psychologists. I mean, that's another thing that kind of contributes to the misperceptions. But actual psychology is based on evidence. It's based on scientific evidence. You know, a person who is a psychologist, like if they are doing therapy, they should be doing therapy that has been studied, has been evaluated. They have evaluated whether it is effective, whether it's safe, if it is more effective than other procedures or techniques that are also available. So evidence, scientific evidence, is very essential in psychology. And behavior, study of behavior. What is behavior? It's one of those words you probably like, well, yeah, I know what that is. I know it when I see it. Behavior is any action that can be directly observed. So this could be physical behavior, verbal behavior. This could be the way you talk to somebody. It could be your actual movements. It could be measured or quantified or rated or evaluated in a variety of different ways, but observable actions are behavior. Now, mental processes. What counts as mental processes? These are internal. These are not directly observable, and so that does make it more complicated to do studies on mental processes. But we have acknowledged that, yeah, these are important, so we need to figure out how to study them. And so this includes internal activities in the mind that are not directly observable. All right, so not directly observable, but still very important, so we include them in psychology. All right, so in this first video, what should you have gotten from it? A general idea of what psychology is, understanding that it'll be explained a little bit further as we get into more topics. And also you should know the definition of behavior and mental processes. And then on a final note, my students who are in my class, these videos are ultimately geared towards my students. But every once in a while, I will address people who may be joining from other classes or not even enrolled in a class, but they're just curious about a topic. I do make my YouTube videos public because I like to share. And so every once in a while, I will talk directly to my students, and then sometimes I might be like, hey, for those of you from other classes, so just as a warning, you know, that's going to be the general setup. All right, so I'm excited. I'm excited about teaching introductory psychology.